Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. James Mault. He is the CEO of BioIntellisense. Jim, thanks for joining me today.
Dr. Nick, thanks so much. It's a pleasure. Always been a pleasure.
So you're an interesting guy, as many of the folks on my show are, but you've got a pretty incredible background with lots of experience that is highly relevant to the topic today. If you would, just give us a brief insight into your journey and some of the sort of key places that you've been and the things that you've done.
Well, it's fun. It's been, as you said, a journey, and it's been a dream come true for me. I started very early as a technician, actually a cardiopulmonary technician, working at the bedside in the intensive care unit. Had the benefit of an incredible mentor by the name of Bob Bartlett, who is well known as the father of ECMO. So he inspired me to have crazy ideas and innovate. And so at a very young age, as an undergraduate student, started building new contraptions for making measurements at the bedside in the intensive care unit. Was fortunate to be able to go to medical school and live out my dream of becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon. Went to medical school at Michigan and then trained in general surgery, trauma, critical care, cardiac surgery, and then thoracic transplant and thoracic oncology at Duke University under another great mentor by the name of David Savaston. And that really was a foundation to come out to University of Colorado on the faculty where I practiced general thoracic surgery, thoracic oncology, ran the intensive care unit and the ECMO program, and also did heart and lung transplants. And along the way, started a kind of a consistent clinical experience where, especially when you're doing transplants and you're sending people home from the hospital in the Colorado arena, patients could be 500 miles away after their transplant. And the predicament of not having any information to rely upon objective measurements after sending those patients home really forced us to keep patients in the inpatient setting for longer durations, because there is no practical means of monitoring them. So this whole notion of remote patient monitoring started driving my interest and passions now more than 20 years ago. And I at that time decided to start a company that was the beginning of this whole journey of building out platforms that can enable various technologies and data capture for remote patient monitoring outside of the hospital. One of those companies ended up going public, and then I found myself the CEO of a publicly traded company. Made it a little difficult to keep operating and doing transplants. So I went on what I thought was going to be a sabbatical from my clinical practice. Ended up being now a 20-year sabbatical. But that led me into another system that we developed called the Health Buddy. And the Health Buddy became, I think, one of the early prototypes for this new model of exception-based remote patient monitoring. It was adopted by the VA system. And then we launched a commercial program to be able to buy literally a device online and have it delivered to your loved one. And then a nurse monitoring service that could track and monitor your loved one with various chronic conditions. That led into an opportunity with Microsoft, where I had the honor and privilege of being one of the principals in the creation of Health Vault. And in 2006, 2007, this notion of cloud-based electronic medical records was actually something very new. Both Google Health and Microsoft Health Vault were very much the pioneers of this crazy notion of storing your medical information in this internet system, which there was a lot of kicking and screaming, a lot of reluctance on the part of health systems to participating in something like that. It was in and of itself a tremendous learning experience that we can chat about. Ultimately, we succeeded and started another company that was, again, a next evolution of this thinking for care coordination and remote patient monitoring called Healthy Circles. That ultimately was acquired by Qualcomm in 2013. And once again, found myself inside of one of the tech giants, helping create a medical focus for, in that case, the wireless connectivity to the medical device industry. So this has been, kind of a looking back on it, a curriculum of sorts that has ultimately brought us to where we are today with BioIntellisense. And I think kind of what seems to be the grand finale of all the scars and bruises and learnings along the way. And BioIntellisense, I think, is in an opportunity to be able to finally make or help make remote patient monitoring something that is ubiquitous. And I mean truly ubiquitous in the sense that the simplicity, the cost effectiveness, and the beneficial outcomes can finally be realized. And I'll stop there.
So, long storied career, obviously starting out in a very intense area of medicine that, demands a lot of data, but actually doesn't get a lot from the patient that's not on the table. When you're on the table, you suddenly get this continuous, availability of data, clearly sort of guided your process. Before we sort of talk about the background, tell us a little bit about BioIntellisense and what it is and what it does.
Sure, great. So BioIntellisense, as you nicely pointed out, we're as a cardiac surgeon, you're spoiled by all the monitors and sensors we have, not only in the operating room but in the intensive care unit, and that affords us the ability to make life and death decisions on a minute-to-minute basis. We literally have the cumulative data stream from just 10 different monitors in the intensive care unit are generating about 1 million pieces of data per hour per patient. So that gives you the ability to be able to see what's happening and to recognize trends and problems, and to be able to take action. Without information, it's hard to take action. And so, all of these circumstances, not just in surgery, but in the practice of medicine in general, there's a paucity of actionable data unless that individual is inside the four walls of the hospital or sitting in front of you in your clinic. And so to BioIntellisense, what these 20 years of scars and bruises I referred to, there's 5 fundamental learnings that have taken place along the way. One is if you want to collect data from a patient outside of the hospital or clinical setting, sending them home with a big box of equipment is not likely to be fruitful. They didn't go to medical school to expect them to hook this stuff up and tell them we now want you to make these measurements on yourself. We want your family to figure out how to be the nurse, even though they didn't go to nursing school or medical school, and make these measurements. It's just not likely to happen. The complexity, the cost, the traditional remote patient monitoring systems were just not scalable, and it wasn't practical to be able to apply that concept universally because of the lack of compliance and the sheer complexity of it. So the starting point is BioIntellisense set out to change that by making the user experience on the part of the patient effortless. And that's not an overstated claim. If the patient is expected to make active measurements of themselves, that's a burden that you're placing. That's a reliance on an effort that you may or may not be able to count on, especially if that patient is higher and higher acuity. So what we're talking about now is something I think was a big epiphany for all of us over the past decade with the introduction of the wearables craze. You could finally put on a little device on your wrist, and without you having to do anything, it would start to measure how many steps you took. And, that was a curiosity. Everybody bought one. Everybody started to learn, how many steps do I normally take in a day? But we also recognized in healthcare that wasn't going to cut it for what we need in order to actually take care of patients from a medical sense. So that brings us to the next dimension of what we're doing at BioIntellisense, which is effortless passive monitoring using a new category of what's now being described as a medical grade wearable. So now we're talking about taking what we learned from the fitness and exercise wearables and upping the ante to say we need wearables that are passive and effortless on the part of patients, but they need to be able to measure in medical grade terms on par with the level of clinical accuracy and reliability that we need to make life and death decisions. In other words, in the intensive care unit, we have to know that the numbers that we're looking at are plus or minus at least better than 5%, which is what most medical devices are. Plus or minus 3% is even better. And so, and when we start talking about remote patient monitoring, think of it in these terms. At least in the intensive care unit, in the hospital, if the numbers aren't making sense, you have the benefit of looking at the patient and examining them, putting your hands on them and saying, okay, the monitor says you have no blood pressure, but you're sitting here talking to me and I can feel a pulse in your wrist. So you can apply some pragmatic common sense. When you start talking about home monitoring, now you're not going to have the benefit of being able to physically examine them. So the burden of reliability and clinical accuracy is actually higher.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Today I'm talking to Dr. James Mault. He is the CEO of BioIntellisense. We were just talking about the technology, wearables, in fact, medical grade wearables. You touched on one of the points, that pervades throughout the medical profession, but even came about when it came to steps. Because as you were talking about that, I thought immediately of the 10,000 steps, this arbitrary number that was important. And the reality is, for a congestive heart failure patient that can barely walk in their home, getting 500 steps would be, a major positive. Whereas, for somebody that's super fit, 10,000 is probably just a walk in the park. So, I think that gets to the point of, the value of this constant availability of data is now it becomes reconcilable with the individual, and it becomes a reference point that we can refer back to and say, oh, for this individual, these are the relevant numbers. And importantly, I think, highlighting the issue of this medical grade element. And I think a great point, the fact that you can't see the patient. This is somebody that's outside of the hospital, so there isn't that oversight. Tell us a little bit about the process of getting to medical grade capabilities, because it's not just, oh, here we have a medical grade device, off you go. There's more to it, right?
Oh, very much so, Nick. It's not for the faint of heart, no pun intended relative to heart failure, but it is a very stark distinction and mindful prospective decision to build a company and a technology platform that is, in FDA terms, medical grade. And so actually from a business point of view, as I kind of culminated all of these learnings over the past 2 decades and had a clear vision for what I wanted to accomplish with BioIntellisense, I actually sought out and found a team of engineers and actually data scientists who had been together working in the wearable space for the past decade. So there's a tremendous body of knowledge and engineering know-how. I took that team and said, okay, now instead of consumer wearables for fitness and exercise, we're going to pursue a medical grade wearable to take care of and monitor sick people. And it really is a complete, wholesale shift in culture, in discipline. You have to implement what are called quality management systems. You have to now document everything prospectively, specifications of what you're going to build. Then you have to build it according to that specification. And then you have to test and verify that what you build actually meets the specification. And this is all table stakes of what it requires to be an FDA registered medical device company. And I've been building these companies serially over the past 20 years. And it's been interesting, the evolution of, I would say, sheer challenge and barriers to entry. In other words, for good reason, it's become harder and harder to get FDA clearance on new technologies and new devices and new medications, because the FDA's ultimate responsibility is the safety and the outcomes, the beneficial outcomes of these devices and drugs. So you now find yourself having to do a host of things that cost a lot more money. So as a startup company, you have to have more capital than a consumer products company in order to do the clinical trials to validate the accuracy of your device or the safety of your system. You have to do shock testing and heat testing and crush testing, and it's an appropriate level of documentation and testing and verification and safety, but at the same time, I think what you'll see is on the other side of this And what we achieved with our Bio Sticker and now our Bio Button medical grade wearables is first of a kind, multi-parameter, continuous vital signs monitors that are measuring minute to minute heart rate, respiratory rate, temperature, 3D motion, sleep, body position, gait analysis, a host of parameters, all streaming out of a simple wearable device that's about the size of a quarter, and being able to do so continuously for 30 days on a single charge. So the simplicity and the the effortless nature of this is truly stick it on and forget it. And this is a bit of a holy grail, frankly, that is about to open the doors to be able to send somebody home with a simple sticker and be able to just continue monitoring them. In fact, now there's not a reason to hold them hostage in the hospital for an extra day or so because you're uncertain about whether they're ready to go home. You'll feel more comfortable sending somebody home because of the fact that it's so easy to keep monitoring them. And now this is the other dimension, is the data science. Is you don't want all this new data overwhelming clinical practice. So the other key aspect of this is to be able to have all this rich data now streaming to a cloud-based analytics engine that can apply what you just described earlier is individualized parameters and alerts and notifications that are custom to that person's baseline physiology, that can then watch for meaningful deviations and negative trends or deterioration and serve that up to the clinician or the nurse case manager on a silver platter.
So all in all, exciting times. Now suddenly we've got continuous data that's available in a simple to use format. And I think you can't underestimate the challenge of getting people to, connect up technology, make it work. I'd love to know, what superpower you had in terms of solving the power problem to make it 30 days. That's very impressive. Set it and forget it for 30 days. That's a whole host of data. And, importantly, you talk about it. I often say this, it's never a data problem. It's a filter problem. It sounds like there's an accompanying cloud-based distillation of that to sort of identify those elements that can now come out. And I think you went through that FDA approval process. So those are FDA approved devices, medical grade. So now available, an opportunity to really start monitoring and get that OR level type data, continuous stream, but also filtered in a way that's really valuable. Exciting times. I think, this is the next frontier, and, credit to 20 years of scars and pain and agony that you've obviously had through this, but to get to this point. So very exciting. Looking forward to seeing what kind of data comes out of it. Unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time, but, appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and share some of the journey and the learnings along the way. So, Jim, thanks for joining me today.
Dr. Nick, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Very much enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, the Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.